The rain came down in thin, needling lines, the kind that did not roar, but whispered, and in that whisper carried a warning most men were too blind to hear. It slipped through the cracks of the land, tapped softly against stone, and soaked the dust until the earth gave off that deep, bitter scent of something long disturbed. Night had settled heavy across the plains, pressing low against the horizon like a burden the sky could no longer carry. Out where no lantern burned and no road held true, a lone man staggered through the dark. His boots dragged more than they stepped, carving uneven trails into the wet ground. His coat, once thick enough to turn wind, hung torn and heavy upon his shoulders, its edges clinging to him like the last thread of a life already slipping loose. Each breath came sharp, uneven, as though his lungs had forgotten the rhythm of living. Blood followed him, not in great measure, but enough. Enough to mark his passing. Enough to tell the land that something wounded moved across it, something that did not belong to the silence it had kept for so long. He should have fallen sooner. Any other man would have. The cold alone was enough to steal strength from bone, and the rain worked slow and steady, seeping through cloth, through skin, until even began to falter. Yet he pressed on, driven not by hope, but by something harder, something quieter, perhaps fear, perhaps purpose, but even such things have their limit. His foot caught against unseen stone, and this time he did not recover. He stumbled forward, one hand reaching for balance that was no longer there, and then he fell, hard, final, into the waiting mud. The sound was dull, swallowed quick by the rain, as though the world had already begun to forget him. He did not rise again. For a long moment, nothing moved. The rain went on in its quiet way. The wind drifted low across the ground. The land remained as it had always been, watching, unmoved, untouched by the small struggles of men. But he had been seen. From the cover of stone and shadow, where the earth rose in jagged lines and the darkness gathered thick, a figure stood unmoving. She had been there long before he came into view, her presence as much a part of the land as the rock beneath her feet. The Apache girl did not step forward at once. She watched. Her frame was slight, but there was nothing fragile in the way she carried herself. The buckskin dress upon her was worn from years of use, its surface marked by travel, weather, and quiet endurance. The fringe along her sleeves hung damp and heavy, swaying faint with each breath of wind. Along the collar, small beads, once bright, had dulled with time, their colors softened but not erased. They spoke of hands that had placed them there with care, of a life shaped not by ease, but by patience. Her hair, dark as the night itself, clung in wet strands against her cheeks and neck. A single braid had come loose, resting over her shoulder, its ties worn thin. Rain traced slow paths down her skin, but she did not move to wipe it away. Her eyes remained fixed on the man, sharp, unyielding, certain. She did not trust what she did not know. The land had taught her that long ago, in ways no words could carry. It had shown her how quickly kindness could turn, how often strangers brought more than just their footsteps into a place. Men especially came with weight of hunger, of greed, of violence, and left with something taken, never given. This one was no different, or so she told herself. Yet something in a way he had walked. No, not walked, struggled, lingered in her mind. The way his strength had faltered, not from weakness alone, but from something deeper. The way he had not called out, not even once, as though he knew no voice would answer. There was truth in that kind of silence, and it unsettled her. The rain eased, if only slightly, its steady whisper softening as though the night itself leaned closer. Still, she did not move. Not yet. She let the moment stretch, let the land speak in its quiet way. The man remained where he had fallen. No motion, no sound, only the faint rise and fall of breath, barely seen beneath the weight of soaked cloth. That was what decided it. Not pity, not mercy, but the simple knowledge that he still lived, and that the choice was now hers. She stepped forward. Her movement was near soundless, her feet finding the ground as though they had known it all their life, which they had. She moved down from the stone, across the wet earth, closing the distance between them with the quiet certainty of one who did not fear what lay ahead, only what might follow. When she reached him, she did not kneel at once. She stood over him, studying, measuring. Then, slowly she crouched. Her hand reached out, firm but cautious, turning him just enough to see his face. Mud streaked his skin, mixed with the faint trace of blood that had dried and run again beneath the rain. His features were not of her people. The lines of his face, the shape of his jaw, these things spoke plain. He was not Apache. The truth settled without surprise. Her gaze lowered to his side. The wound there was deep enough to matter, wrapped in cloth that had long since lost its purpose. Water had soaked through it, turned it dark and heavy. Whoever had bound it had done so in haste, or with little care for whether he lived beyond the hour. Her fingers hovered near it, not touching. Another step, another choice. The easier path lay behind her. She could stand, turn, and leave him to the night. The land would finish what it had begun. By morning, there would be nothing left but stillness and no burden carried forward. That was the way of things. That was what kept one alive. Yet she did not rise. Something held her there. Not kindness alone, nor weakness, but something harder to name. A quiet pull, deep and steady, that spoke not to comfort, but to consequence. At last, she acted. Her hands found his coat, gripping the heavy, soaked fabric. She pulled once, testing the weight. It was more than she should have taken on, but she did not let go. Step by step, she dragged him. The ground fought her. The mud clung, the stones shifted beneath uncertain footing, and more than once she paused, not from doubt, but from the simple demand of breath. Yet she did not stop, not fully, not long enough to turn back. The shelter lay not far, though the night stretched the distance into something greater. It was hidden well, set between stone and earth where the wind lost its strength and the fire, when lit, spoke only in low, guarded light. By the time she reached it, her arms trembled with the effort. Still, she did not falter. She pulled him inside, out of the rain, into the narrow space where warmth could be made and kept. There, at last, she released her hold and let him settle upon the ground. For a moment, she simply stood, watching, listening. The storm lingered beyond the stone, but here its voice had softened. The world felt smaller. Closer. She moved again. The fire came first. Dry scraps, kept hidden from the reach of weather, caught slow but sure beneath her hands. A faint glow rose, then steadied, pushing back the dark just enough to reveal what lay before her. She knelt beside him. Her hands worked with quiet precision, unwrapping the ruined cloth, cleaning what she could, binding it anew with strips torn from what little she could spare. She did not rush. Each motion carried purpose, learned not from comfort, but from necessity. He stirred once, a low sound escaping him, but did not wake. When it was done, she sat back. The fire crackled low between them. Shadows moved along the stone, rising and falling with the flicker of light. She said nothing. There were no words to give, only watchfulness, only time. And as the hours stretched on, and the storm outside gave way to a quieter night, it seemed, if only for a moment, that the land itself had taken notice, not of the man, but of the choice she had made. Morning came slow, wrapped in mist and the lingering breath of rain. The storm had passed, but it had not truly left. Its memory clung to the ground, to the stones, to the damp air that settled low and quiet across the land. The sky hung pale and uncertain, as though it had not yet decided whether to bring light or more shadow. Inside the narrow shelter, the fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals. Thin trails of smoke curled upward, slow and steady, carrying the faint scent of charred wood and wet earth. The man stirred. It was not the movement of strength, but of struggle. A shallow breath, a tightening of the brow, a quiet shift as pain found him before his thoughts could. His eyes opened not with clarity, but with confusion, searching, unfocused at first, as though the world before him did not belong to the one he remembered. Then he saw her. She sat near the fire, her form still and composed, as though she had not moved since the night before. The soft light touched the edges of her buckskin dress, revealing the worn texture of its surface, the careful stitching that held it together despite years of use. The fringe along her sleeves had dried uneven, some strands curling inward, others hanging loose as if shaped by the wind itself. Her gaze rested on him, unblinking, unreadable. She did not greet him. There was no soft word, no gesture of comfort, only watchfulness, the kind that measured not just what was seen, but what lay beneath it. He swallowed, his throat dry despite the damp air. For a moment, he said nothing, as though unsure whether speech would break whatever fragile hold he still had on the moment. Then quietly he spoke. A single word, rough, unsteady. Where? The rest did not come. She did not answer. Not because she could not, but because she chose not to. Instead, she reached beside her, lifting a small cup carved from wood, its surface smoothed by use. She placed it within his reach, the motion slow, deliberate. Inside was water, clear, still, offered without expression. He hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand trembled, not just from weakness, but from something less certain. He drank, each swallow careful, as though reminding himself that he was still among the living. Silence returned once more, but it was no longer the same silence as before. Days passed in that quiet rhythm, marked not by words, but by small, necessary actions. The sun rose and fell beyond the shelter, its light shifting across the stone, tracing time in ways neither of them spoke of. She remained as she had always been, reserved, watchful, her presence steady as the ground beneath her feet. When she spoke, it was with purpose, no word wasted, no sound given without reason. Her voice carried low and even, shaped not by softness, but by certainty. He was different. At first, his speech came slow, each sentence weighed down by pain and exhaustion. But as strength returned to him, so too did his voice. It grew easier, quicker, more willing to fill the space she left untouched. Gratitude came often, too often. He thanked her for the water, for the fire, for the binding of his wound, for the shelter that stood between him and the land that had nearly claimed him. His tone was careful, measured in a way that suggested not just appreciation, but intent. She listened, but she did not accept it without thought. There was something in the way he spoke, something that did not rest easy. Not wrong, not outright, but not wholly true either. He told her he had no one, no tribe, no kin, no place left to claim. A man without belonging. The words came clean, practiced perhaps, carried on a tone meant to draw sympathy without asking for it outright. And she heard them, but she did not believe all of it. The land had shown her too many men who claimed to be alone, only to prove otherwise when it mattered most. Loneliness could be worn like a coat, put on when needed, cast aside when it no longer served. Still, she did not challenge him. Not yet, because something had begun to shift. It was not sudden, not loud, but it was there. He began to help. At first, it was little things, small movements, careful and uncertain. Gathering wood from near the shelter, where the ground remained steady enough for his still healing body. Adjusting the stones that held the fire, his hands slow but deliberate, as though relearning work he had once known well. Each day, he did a little more. Each day, he stayed a little longer on his feet. Strength returned to him in quiet increments, building not in bursts, but in steady, patient steps. And with it came a presence that no longer felt like that of a dying man, but something else, something that began to fill the space around him. There were moments, small, fleeting, when the silence between them changed. It no longer stood as a wall. It softened. She would glance toward him while he worked, her eyes lingering just long enough to mark the motion of his hands, the set of his shoulders. And sometimes he would look back, not quickly, not with surprise, but as though he had already known she would. Those moments passed without acknowledgement, but they did not go unnoticed. The fire became something more than warmth. It became a place where time slowed, where the distance between them felt less defined, where the quiet held something heavier than before, something that pressed at the edges of thought and feeling alike. Glances lasted longer. Silences deepened, and the weight of loneliness, long carried by both, though never spoken, began to ease. Not fully, not enough to be named, but enough to be felt, enough to be dangerous. He watched her often, not with the open curiosity of a stranger, but with something more contained. His gaze would settle on her when she moved, when she worked, when she sat in stillness as though carved from the very stone around her. There was something in his eyes then, something quieter than words. It resembled admiration, or perhaps longing, the kind that grows in silence, fed not by what is said, but by what is not. And she, though cautious, though bound by instinct and memory alike, did not turn away as quickly as before. There were times she let his gaze remain, times she did not rise when she might have, times she allowed the space between them to exist without closing it, without breaking it apart. But the land remembers what men try to hide. It does not forget the weight of footsteps, the truth behind silence, the meaning carried in actions not yet revealed. And though the fire burned steady, though the quiet between them had begun to feel less like distance and more like something shared, not all kindness is born from truth. Some of it is only waiting for the right moment to show its hand. That it began with something small. So small it might have passed unnoticed by anyone who had not learned to live by watching. A look too sharp to be careless. It came and went in less than a breath, a flicker in his eyes when he thought himself unobserved. Not the look of a man taking in the land for its beauty, but of one measuring it, marking distance, weighing ground. She saw it, and though her face did not change, something within her stilled. Then came a question, simple in its words, harmless in its shape, yet the tone beneath it did not match. He asked about the hills beyond the shelter, how far they stretched, whether water ran there in the dry months, whether others passed through. His voice remained calm, steady, touched with that same quiet ease he had worn since gaining back his strength. But the meaning beneath it did not rest the same. It carried intent. And intent, once noticed, does not fade. She answered little, less than before, and what she gave without detail. Still, he did not press. That, too, she noticed. Days continued as they had, at least on the surface. The fire burned. The wind passed. The rhythm of survival remained unchanged. But beneath it, something shifted. She began to watch him differently, not as a stranger taken in, not as a man recovering, but as something not yet revealed. She saw the way his eyes moved now, not lingering on the sky, nor the shape of distant stone, but tracing paths, routes, edges of cover, places where a man might approach unseen or leave without sound. There was no wonder in his gaze, only thought, careful, measured, deliberate. His hand told the same story. It rested too often near the knife at his side, the same blade he had once claimed he barely knew how to use. At first, it had seemed natural. A wounded man seeking reassurance in the one thing he believed might protect him. But now, there was no uncertainty in the way his fingers brushed against its handle. No hesitation, no unfamiliarity, only habit, the kind that comes from long use, the kind that cannot be hidden, not from eyes that know what to look for. Still, she said nothing. She let the moments gather, let the pieces fall into place as they would. And then she found it. It was not hidden well. That was what struck her first, not the object itself, but the carelessness of its concealment, as though he believed himself already safe, already trusted. It lay beneath his things, wrapped in cloth, tucked just far enough from sight to escape notice from one who did not search. But she searched, not out of suspicion alone, but out of certainty. Her fingers unwrapped it slowly, and there it was, a mark, carved into metal worn smooth by time. Its edges were notched, its surface bearing the faint lines of use, of handling, of belonging. She knew it, not by name, but by meaning. Not Apache, not neutral, enemy. Her hand stilled. For a long moment, she did not move. The world beyond the shelter continued as it always had. The wind passing low, the distant cry of something unseen, the shifting of dust and stone. But within her, something settled, The truth did not strike like thunder. It did not break through her thoughts with force or fury. It came quiet, slow, heavy, like dust after a long ride, when the air thickens and the ground carries the weight of every step taken before. He had not come by chance. There had been no wandering, no lost path, no man without direction. Every step he had taken had led him here. To her. He had not stayed out of need. Not because of the wound, not because of the storm. Those had only been the door. The reason lay deeper, in the marks she now held, in the questions he had asked, in the looks he thought unseen. He had come because of her people, because of what she was. Apache. The truth settled fully then, leaving no space for doubt. And what he intended was not survival. It was betrayal. She wrapped the mark once more, placed it back where she had found it, left no sign of its discovery. When he returned, she was as she had been before. Still, quiet, unchanged, or so it seemed. That night, the fire burned lower than usual. The flames did not rise as high, nor did they hold their strength. They flickered instead, casting long, uneven shadows against the stone. The light stretched and bent, turning shapes into something uncertain, something that did not hold steady form. He sat across from her, as he always had. He spoke in that same voice, calm, steady, touched with a quiet warmth that might have been mistaken for truth. He spoke of small things, of a day, of the land, of nothing that carried weight enough to draw question. But now, she heard it differently. Every word carried more than its sound. Every pause held meaning. Every glance, brief, measured, spoke of something waiting beneath the surface. She did not interrupt, did not challenge. She let him speak, let him believe. For he believed she did not know, believed the lie had taken root, believed the trust he had built, piece by careful piece, stood firm. And that belief would cost him everything, for she was Apache. And Apache did not forget, did not forgive, and did not fall twice for the same blade. The night before it ended, the air stood still. Not a breath of wind moved across the land. Not a whisper stirred the dust. Even the distant hills seemed to hold themselves in silence, as though the world had paused, waiting for something it already knew would come. Inside the narrow shelter, the fire had burned low. What remained was no more than a faint glow, its light weak and unsteady, barely holding back the dark that pressed in from every side. Shadows lay thick against the stone, shifting only when the embers gave a tired flicker. She lay beneath her blanket, still, unmoving, her breathing slow, even measured with care. To any watching eye, she was at rest. But she was not asleep. She had not slept. Not that night. Not after what she had seen. Time passed in quiet stretches, each moment lengthening into the next. The kind of silence that does not ease the mind, but sharpens it. The kind that settles deep into the bones, where instinct lives and waits. Across from her, the man lay in shadow. For a long while, he did not move. Then, slowly, he stirred. It was not the restless shift of a man caught in uneasy dreams. It was controlled, careful, intentional. He opened his eyes. The faint light caught them just enough to reveal their focus, clear, steady, fully awake. There was no confusion now, no weakness, no trace of the man who had once staggered through rain and blood. That man had never truly existed. This one did. He did not rise at once. Instead, he waited, listening, watching, measuring the silence between each breath she took. Then, with slow precision, he moved. His hand slipped toward his side, toward the knife he had carried all along. His fingers wrapped around its handle with ease. No hesitation, no uncertainty. The blade came free without sound, its edge catching the faintest glimmer of dying firelight. He pushed himself to his feet, careful, every movement placed with purpose, each step taken as though the ground itself might betray him if he did not treat it right. He began to close the distance between them. One step, then another. The space that had once held quiet understanding now held something else entirely. Something cold, something final. He moved like a hunter, silent, focused, certain of the outcome he believed already his. Before him lay what he thought was prey. Still, unaware, vulnerable beneath the cover of night. Or so he believed. He stood over her now, the knife lowered slightly in his grip, angled with intent. His breathing remained steady, controlled in a way that spoke not of hesitation, but of experience. This was no act of desperation. It was purpose fulfilled. For a brief moment, he watched her, perhaps to be certain, perhaps to take measure of what he was about to end. Then, he moved. The moment came quick. Steel flashed, but not in his favor. Before his blade could fall, her eyes opened. Sharp, awake, waiting. Her hand moved faster than thought. From beneath the blanket, her own blade rose, drawn not in panic, but in certainty. The sound that followed was not loud, not a clash, not a cry, just the dull, final truth of steel finding its mark. His motion faltered. Surprise crossed his face, not in fear, but in the sudden understanding that what he had believed had been wrong. He had not been the hunter. Not this time. The struggle that followed was brief, brutal in its closeness, final in its end. He tried to recover, to strike again, but the space was too tight, the moment already lost. She moved with the same precision he had shown, but without doubt, without delay. Her blade struck true. Once. Then no more was needed. The strength left him as quickly as it had once seemed to return. His body gave way, falling to the ground with a weight that echoed softly against the stone. And then, silence. The kind that comes only after something has been decided. The fire crackled faintly, its last embers holding on against the dark. The shadows no longer stretched or shifted. They simply remained settled, as though even they had found their place again. He lay still upon the ground he had walked so confidently just days before. The same ground he had crossed with careful steps. The same shelter he had entered under the guise of weakness. His deception ended not in victory, but in the very fate he had planned for another. She rose slowly to her feet. Her breath remained steady, though something deeper moved within her chest. Not chaos, not fear, something stronger, something older. She looked down at him, not with anger, not with sorrow, but with understanding, the kind that does not come from this moment alone, but from all that came before it, from the land, from her people, from a truth she had been raised to carry. There was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, only certainty, the kind carved deep by survival, by knowing when to trust and when not to, by understanding that some choices are not made for oneself, but for something greater, for blood, for tribe, for all that stands behind a single life and gives it meaning. She did not linger. The night had not yet lifted, but its end was near. A faint line of pale gray touched the edge of the sky beyond the stone, signaling the coming of dawn. She moved with quiet purpose, gathering only what was hers, leaving nothing behind that did not belong to the land. When she stepped out from the shelter, the air met her cool and still. The world remained as it had been, vast, silent, untouched by what had passed within that narrow space. Before morning fully broke, she was gone. Her path led back across the land, toward the place where her people waited, where her belonging did not need to be spoken, because it had never been in question. Back to her tribe, back to where she belonged. And behind her, the shelter stood empty. The fire would soon die. The traces of what had happened would fade, carried away by wind, by time, by the quiet forgetting of the land. For in the end, trust could be broken, kindness could be deceived, but tribe came first. Some bonds are forged in truth, and others are nothing more than shadows waiting for the light to reveal them. Tell me, if you had walked her path, would you have trusted the man who came in the storm, or seen through him before the night turned deadly? If this tale kept you watching till the very last breath of dawn, then leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and make sure to subscribe to Frontier Tales, where every story is carved from dust, danger, and the unforgiving truth of the Wild West.